We define an exercise snack is a 1-minute bout of vigorous exercise that's spread repeatedly throughout the day. In a vigorous, above zone 2, if you will, might provide more benefits for that given amount of time. When people think of that term cardio health, VO2 max is the best measure of it, and it's highly correlated. It's a really important marker for things like your risk of dying from all causes, your risk of developing many chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers. So the higher your VO2 max, the lower your risk for developing these various conditions. And ideally, they want to be engaged in activities to maintain their VO2 max as they age, or ideally boost it through regular physical activity and exercise. And having about a 10% higher VO2 max is associated with about a 15% lower risk of dying in any given cause. So it's that 10% boost in fitness and its associated risk reduction. It's about the same as a 5-point change in your blood pressure.
Today we have a pleasure of welcoming Dr. Martin Gibala. He's a muscle physiologist, professor, and the kinesiology department chair at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And he's very well known for his pioneering research on health benefits of high-intensity interval training. And he is also a co-author of the best-selling book, The 1-Minute Workout. Martin, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Martin, can you possibly share your background with our viewers?
Yeah, so just in brief, I've been a professor of kinesiology at McMaster for 25 years now. I was interested in the field. I played a lot of sports growing up, wasn't particularly good at any of them, but it got me interested in sports and exercise. I became a triathlete in high school, and I heard about this field called kinesiology, which was quite fascinating to me, this idea of the science of human movement. And so I went into the field as an undergraduate. I changed my mind. I was going to go to architecture school, and I went into kinesiology instead. And I was fascinated by the area of physiology. I had a second-year professor who taught human physiology, and that really got me interested in how the body worked. And from there, I just kept going, and it's turned into a real, I think I have a personal and professional interest in exercise responses, and in particular, time-efficient exercise.
Amazing. Can you give us a couple main points of your best-selling book?
Yeah, so really the book talks about the value of brief, vigorous, intermittent exercise or physical activity. And so big messages are, high intensity interval training. It's not just for athletes. Many different people can do it. People think of high intensity. It's this all out, as hard as you can go, gut busting type exercise, but that's really only one type. And really, we're just talking about vigorous physical activity, which is well defined in the physical activity guidelines. And so really, the book just tries to break down some of the myths, the stereotypes around interval training, and make the case that, a little bit can be quite beneficial, and many more people than we think can perform interval training. And last, it's a topic that we sort of rediscover every few decades. Athletes have been doing it for over a century now, but I think we've learned a lot about how the basic concepts of brief, vigorous exercise can be applied to many different individuals, both apparently healthy and those with various chronic conditions, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and even some types of cancer.
Okay, great.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Can I follow up with that question? So about the 1-minute workout, I think nowadays, there's more, a lot of people wanted to do it, incorporate into their daily life by doing a couple minutes throughout the day. They probably can maximize their performance, have a lot of benefit. But one question I wanted to ask is that how intense should we go? Like when we practice at home, because we don't have fancy equipment to measure this, maybe measure those things. How can we do it, practice at home if I wanted to do this 1-minute workout?
Yes, and so the first idea is, what is vigorous exercise? So, high intensity to me equates with vigorous intensity, and so vigorous is a term it's really well defined. in the public health guidelines. So for example, the World Health Organization, on a 10-point scale where, 0 is laying on the couch and 10 is sprint from danger pace, save your child from an oncoming car, run from a fire. Vigorous is 7 or 8 on that 10-point scale. You couldn't have a conversation with a friend or a workout partner. You could spit out a couple of words and phrases, but you wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation. And those are just subjective cues. But we can also use metrics like heart rate or VO2. But to your point, many people don't have specialized equipment or devices to measure. So I like that, 7 on a 10-point scale is a pretty good metric for most people.
Sounds great. I think that's really good measurement. Another follow-up question will be, what type of exercise should I do with aerobic or different type, or it doesn't matter? As long as I can get my heart rate going, it doesn't matter what type.
I think the concept of high intensity interval training can broadly be applied to both aerobic as well as resistance type exercise. Obviously, it's more rooted in aerobic training, cycling, rowing, running, and that's how athletes have traditionally utilized it. But this idea of going hard, taking a break, repeating that pattern, it can be widely applied. And so, for example, bodyweight style exercise is a tremendous example of activity that provides some strengthening benefits. But if you keep recovery intervals short, you can get a cardiovascular training stimulus as well. And so it's a very functional type activity, I think, in order to improve our health and fitness and our strength.
Thank you. And then how long should I have maximum of my intensive training, and how long should I take the break? So what is the intervals?
Yeah, and so I think one of the beauties of interval training is the infinite variety. And so I can't sit here and say, well, this is the best, or, certainly this is the best for you, because it's highly individualized. But I think for most people, it doesn't matter what the best is. They just want to do something and know that it can be beneficial for them. And so, where the title of my book comes from, the 1 minute workout, it's from studies that we are doing that involved 3 20-second vigorous efforts. Now that was typically over a 10-minute period, but interval training can be as short as 15, 20-second intervals. There's some studies looking at 5, 4, 10-second intervals. So you can really get down low and up to 10-minute intervals or longer. So again, the sky's the limit in terms of the variability. And I think that's what makes it so appealing to many people, is the infinite variety.
Got it. Sounds great. I think that's a great idea, that workout. And then if you can incorporate, put that into your daily life. So I sit in the office for like five hours a day. So if I can just get up and doing something in between, and I can still get a health benefit, that would be a great idea. We
define an exercise snack is a 1 minute bout of vigorous exercise that's spread repeatedly throughout the day. To your point, if you're going to be sitting in an office all day, you can get out for a 1 minute exercise snack and take the stairs, or you could do a series of air squats in your office, or lunges, or jumping jacks. So it's almost old style calisthenics, but if people do 3, 4, 5 of those snacks through the day, it can really provide benefit, both in terms of some cardiovascular conditioning, some strengthening, and as well, it breaks up prolonged periods of sedentary behavior, prolonged sitting, which we know is not good for us as well. And so I'm not here to suggest that, you do 4 or 5 exercise snacks and that's all you have to do, and you don't have to worry about the public health guidelines. But even those 4 or 5 snacks spread throughout the day can provide a surprising amount of benefit if that's only what you have time for, or the time that you're willing to commit to physical activity.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's a great idea for us to actually do that. And it's not difficult enough for us to commit the time. We could just get up and do something like once a while. That's great. That's a great idea. And then it's scientifically proven we can have a benefit from it. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, many of these studies are small, what we call proof of concept, but definitely there's just emerging evidence that this brief, vigorous physical activity can be beneficial, and now we're looking to do larger randomized controlled trials with more extensive measurements, longer periods of time, and in larger cohorts of individuals as well. But you have to start somewhere, right, to demonstrate the concept, and then you build from there.
Exactly. I think, can I just follow up with another question? It's
Sure,
actually on the list. So there's a lot of interest on the Zone 2 training, right? So Zone 2 is kind of like the different idea of high intensive interval training. I just kind of wanted to know, what is the difference? What are the benefits of those different type of training? One of the ideas is that Zone 2 can kind of reaching the limit of your lactose limit, or building up more lactose limit, or something like that. I kind of wanted to know your idea of those, the difference between those two type of training.
Yeah, obviously Zone 2 training sort of having a moment right now. It's, you read it a lot on social media or by influential podcasters. Now, let's take a step back. Traditionally, athletes talk about 3 exercise intensity domains: moderate, heavy, and severe. And these are characterized, or there's breakpoints to distinguish very different metabolic responses in these various zones. And so Zone 2 has become popularized. Essentially, it's low to moderate, steady state type exercise below the first lactate threshold, or below a blood lactate of around 2 millimole. It's also associated with a talk test, very easy to talk to, your partner. I think Zone 2 has been popularized because the way that high level athletes train is basically an 80-20 mix of low intensity, quote unquote, Zone 2 training and high intensity intervals. And now these athletes are often doing 25 or 30 hours a week of training. And so even 20% of that at high intensity is 6-7 hours of training. Where I would take exception, I think, from some of the messaging out there is, just because high level athletes train that way, it doesn't mean how that's the way that everyone else has to train, or there's something magical about this 80-20 mix, especially for people who are just doing public health guidelines or doing even less than that. So I think there's some overstatement around the potential benefits of Zone 2 training, especially when it comes to things like mitochondrial health. But if someone is going to do any amount of exercise and they're going to do it a blend of moderate or Zone 2 and high intensity intervals, it's not a bad prescription. I think, there's just not the evidence right now to say it's the best or a particularly magical form of training.
I see. So maybe like a mix of the two type might still be the best choice for most of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And to my, I would submit that the less amount of time you're willing to allocate to physical activity, engaging more in a vigorous, above Zone 2, if you will, might provide more benefits for that given amount of time.
So the book, if I remember, was published in 2017. So it's been 7 years since the first edition was published. And so how your views have changed on some of the concepts described in the book, if any changes?
Yeah, I wouldn't say any of my views have changed. I think they've rather been strengthened or reinforced by the continuing evidence that comes out. And so, for example, in the book, we were just starting our studies around exercise snacking at the time. And so since then, there's many more studies looking at the potential benefits of exercise snacking, or what's also known, another format is low volume, high intensity interval training, but this idea of just doing small amounts. So I think if anything, the major messages in the book have certainly withstood the test of time. And again, my opinion has only been strengthened or reinforced as more and more data is coming out. Certainly, I don't look back at the book and go, oh, that was wrong. I don't think there's anything in the book that's explicitly wrong. Sometimes we can be suggested that we were maybe overstating a few things, but or we're simplifying things. But of course, the way you write for the general public is very different than how we would write in a scientific article. So we try and make the messaging accessible to people, something they can understand, and you know, for a more broad audience than if we're just writing for our scientific peers.
Okay, got it.
The next question would be the VO2 max, right? So it's in a hot topic these days. Is it feasible for us to kind of measure it or estimate at home?
Yeah, so two things I think individuals could do. One is, of course, there's many different fitness calculators online that you can find, but there's one that's scientifically validated. And so if your audience just wanted to Google world fitness level, they'll be taken to an online calculator, again, that's based on a lot of good science, much of it that's come out of Norway. And by putting some inputs in, your biological sex, your resting heart rate, the type of general activity that you do on a regular basis, your age, it will give you a number. It's not going to say it's a precise number for you, but it's going to give you a reasonable estimate. And so that would be a very simple way that doesn't take any effort or exercise at all. A better way would be, there's a number of submaximal tests. So things like, you know, your audience may be familiar with beep tests or the YMCA step test. And so these are submaximal tests, you know, as simple as, for example, stepping up and down on a box or a stair repeated times, measuring your submaximal heart rate, and that can estimate your VO2 max. And many of those tests have been validated in the laboratory. And so I think that's probably, you know, choosing one of those. And then even if the number is not precisely accurate, it's still going to be fairly reproducible over time. And so to your question, you can say, well, I've been doing this training program for 3 months. Has my VO2 max changed based on that same method? And I think that would be the way to go for individuals who don't have access to a laboratory like ours for direct measurement.
Oh, that's fantastic. I always wanted to measure it, but I don't want to go to a lab to actually test. So it's nice to know I can actually estimate at home. That's awesome. Actually, I think that for our audience, if you could explain what is the VO2 max, that would be awesome. I forgot to ask that question in the beginning. Yeah.
Sure. So VO2 max is simply the maximum rate of oxygen uptake by the body. It's typically elicited when we do strenuous exercise. And so you might have this image of an exercise stress test or someone cycling on a bike or on a treadmill, and you're measuring oxygen uptake through their mouth, capturing all the gases, but it's absolutely defined as the highest rate of oxygen uptake by the body, and it reflects the peak integrated capacity of the body, of your heart, of your blood vessels, of your lungs, of your muscles to take up and utilize oxygen. And so you can sort of think of it as the ceiling for aerobic metabolism. It's obviously very important for athletes, but it's the best measure of cardiorespiratory fitness. So when people think of that term cardio health, VO2 max is the best measure of it. And it's highly correlated. It's a really important marker for things like your risk of dying from all causes, your risk of developing many chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers. So the higher your VO2 max, the lower your risk for developing these various conditions. The other important thing to remember is, for many people, it's just getting out of the bottom level. You just don't want to be in the basement of your VO2 max because even small changes from there, small improvements, are associated with marked improvements in your health. And so, you know, many people suggest it should be a clinical vital sign, something that we routinely measure, like our breathing rate and our blood pressure. But as we discussed earlier, there's not a simple, easy way to measure it. But it should be something that people worry about or think about. And ideally, they want to be engaged in activities to maintain their VO2 max as they age, or ideally boost it through regular physical activity and exercise. Having about a 10% higher VO2 max is associated with about a 15% lower risk of dying in any given cause. So it's that specific in terms of the relationship. So a one metabolic higher equivalent in your VO2 max, which is about a 10% number for most people. And, you know, for many individuals with, you know, even 6 or 8 weeks of exercise training, you can certainly boost your VO2 max by 10%. So it doesn't take a lot of physical activity. in order to get an improvement. And again, it's just small changes can be extremely beneficial for most individuals.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that's the first time I heard this number. This is awesome.
And the other thing, we think about more terms that we measure in a doctor's office or measures in a doctor's office, things like our waist circumference or our blood pressure. That 10% boost in fitness and its associated risk reduction, it's about the same as a 5-point drop in your blood pressure. So, you can look at these sort of metrics as well, or a 1 millimole change in your blood sugar. So when you put it in that context, it's, I think, quite striking for a lot of individuals, or they're surprised that such relatively small changes in fitness are associated with such marked improvements in risk reduction.
So those exercise training that you're talking about that can dramatically increase your VO2 max, are this high intense 1 minute workout that you talked about before?
Yeah, and so obviously, there's no free lunch at the end of the day, right? And so if we want the benefits of time efficient exercise, it has to be at a vigorous or fairly intensive, intensity. And so I don't want to give the impression that people can do a few exercise snacks. That's the best to measure your VO2 max improvement, and you're never going to get type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease. But one of the things that I do in the book is I gave sample workouts that people could try on their own. And the key thing for any workout that we chose, it had to be rooted in studies that showed an improvement in VO2 max when people did that type of workout for at least 6 weeks or so. And, you can improve your VO2 max many different ways. It's probably different for all of us. Some of us respond better to traditional endurance exercise, some better to high intensity. And so the best type of physical activity is to spread it out, do different types and different amounts. But many different types of exercise can improve VO2 max. But on a dose-dependent level, I think there's fairly compelling evidence that the more intense the exercise, the more vigorous the exercise, the greater the potential improvement in VO2 max.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Because you have to train harder and then maybe reaching to your limits. So that's why you can increase the max, right? So
exactly, and when you think about the underlying parameters that determine VO2 max, it's things like your heart and your blood and your muscles. And so the greater stress on those physiological systems, they tend to respond better. So the epidemiological evidence largely aligns with the biochemical evidence suggesting what's the mechanistic basis for these changes.
Actually, my company, we have a mobile app which we developed together with the scientists from the University of Cambridge, where this step test was taken as a basis, and we basically automated it on a mobile phone, and the accuracy is quite impressive. Basically, it produces approximately 90% accuracy.
That's fantastic. Many people are wearing devices or they have phones, and there's different apps in that. So it's great to know that, there's some validated apps that are out there to know that, you can track that over time and use that particular measure. So that's great to hear.
Just to close on this topic of measurement of VO2 max, have you tried to compare the gold standard data from gas tests with the data provided by Apple Watch or Garmin Watch?
We have not done any of that. Yeah, we haven't done any of that explicit testing. I think the evidence out there would suggest that they're okay. Generally these things may be correlated, not at a 0.9 like you just alluded to. So I think they're okay. None of these devices any of these tests are necessarily great at predicting at the individual level. If we had 1,000 listeners and we measured all of them, the average would probably be pretty good, but our ability to predict individual VO2 max changes in any single listener might vary quite a bit. So, that's the only thing people have to keep in mind for any of these tests is it's an estimate based on a typical group response, and it's not necessarily entirely accurate for the individual.
Okay, got it. But is it good enough for someone who is just starting their VO2 max training?
Absolutely, right. There's a
Absolutely.
trade-off there between precision, cost, cumbersomeness, and ease. And so I think for many individuals who just want a reasonable estimate of where am I, it's going to provide that reasonable estimate. Absolutely. And most of these tests, even the predictive submaximal tests, they're fairly repeatable, right? And so even if the number absolutely is wrong, the directional change over time, are you trending positive or trending negative? They tend to be pretty good at that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Chong, you have a next question ready?
Yeah. Another question is, we're talking about we wanted to challenge ourselves, so then we can be benefits to increase our VO2 max. For me, there's some exercise initially they're challenging for me, but over the time I find them easier and easier. Does it mean that I need to higher goals to be able to further improve? Otherwise I can't really get any benefit. I just wanted to know your opinion on that.
Yeah, so for a given absolute workload, the relative stress goes down the more fit you get, and so yes, you have to keep pushing the envelope, if you will, and so what's going to elicit 70% of your maximal heart rate when you're just starting out? As you start to get more fit, that same stress, that speed on the bike or whatever is not going to elicit the same stress. And so you have to crank up the workload. So in short, yes, you need to build in progression in the workouts in order to maintain the physiological stress in order to potentially keep improving. But, of course, it's frustrating for all of us. It sort of declines over time, right? And we tend to see a lot of benefit early, and then over time it starts to tail off, but then it becomes more about the maintenance, right? And can you hold this? And especially as we age, you want to arrest that decline, the inevitable decline in your VO2 max. You want to lessen that slope as much as you can, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. As long as if you wanted to get some improvement, you need to stress yourself. If you don't feel that stress, then they're hard to see that improvement.
Martin, so based on your experience, so what is the best protocol for someone who is just starting to do VO2 max? Someone who's got zero experience.
Yeah, I guess those are two different questions, right? And so for someone who's just starting, it's almost, we'll just tell people, get out of your comfort zone. And so if someone's only exercise is walking around the block at night, or maybe walking a block to get the mail or visit a neighbor or something, or walk to the store, for them, picking up the pace for a few light posts and then backing off, as simple as that sounds, just going a little harder than they normally would. So they maybe feel a little bit more out of breath, just subjectively. They feel their heart rate and their breathing rate go up a little bit. That's probably enough of a challenge for them to get them started. And if they repeat that, that's going to be enough to improve their VO2 max. So again, it's meeting people where they are and just finding a pace for you that's challenging, getting out of your comfort zone when you're just starting out. Now, the question of what's the best protocol to improve VO2 max, that's quite different. And the evidence would suggest that repeated hard intervals that last 3 to 5 minutes, so the highest pace that you can sustain for about 4 minutes or so, take a break and repeat that, 8, 10 times. That's the type of training that the research would suggest is probably the best type of training to improve VO2 max. So that's both high volume and high intensity training. So if you're going to pick one, that would probably be the type to do. But, getting back to this idea, variety is good, right? And so I think using different types of intervals, different types of protocols is going to be the best bet for most individuals. Sort of, you spread that risk around, if you will.
Okay, and so the protocol, the 4-minute protocol which you mentioned, I think it has a kind of a special name in the on the internet these days. It's called Norwegian 4x4. Is that the one?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's literally been hundreds of studies out of Norway that use this classic 4x4 minute interval protocol, typically at a workload that elicits about 85 or 90% of your maximal heart rate. And that's usually with 3 minutes of recovery in between. So yeah, that's the classic Norwegian protocol as it's become known as.
Yeah, the question follow up on that is that because there's I think there's some scientific evidence saying that there's after benefit, even like after you did this workout, and then the benefits still retain, right, throughout the day.
So, I think people will say, if we're talking about weight management or calorie burning, many people like to do exercise to try and lose some weight. Of course, nutrition is the main driver there, but personal trainers will talk about this afterburn effect, or this idea of a heightened metabolic rate, or a higher rate of calorie burning in recovery. And that's, it tends to be higher after you do more vigorous or intense exercise. And so even if you do the 1 minute workout or these few short sprints, people will say, well, how can that be associated with any calorie burn at all? And it's because you have this higher afterburn during recovery. It's often overstated on the internet, but it's real if you measure it. It's transient. But if you do that repeatedly over time, you can see significant energy expenditure throughout the day, and that's going to help support weight management efforts, which of course are mainly achieved through nutrition.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's other type of measurement. Maybe you measure like the blood glucose, and then you can continue and see this benefit even just after burn benefit, right? So I think
it depends. Yeah, when we're talking about these, enduring benefits, certainly work, where we use continuous glucose monitors, or these are devices where you can measure glucose every 5 seconds. You can see sustained improvements in insulin sensitivity for 24 to 48 hours after an acute bout of exercise. So there's definitely enduring benefits, but again, they if you stop doing the exercise, they tail off pretty quickly. So it looks, especially when it comes to blood sugar control, insulin sensitivity, it's this idea of the repeated exercise bouts, these repeated acute bouts over time that are important to help maintain the blood sugar control.
That's amazing. I definitely wanted to try because like my work, like I'm a scientist, I don't do lab work very often, but I miss it. I sit in the lab, I sit in the desk for a couple hours, and sometimes I forgot to stand up and do something. So I think that's a good idea for me to actually get up and doing things. I think right now the evidence are showing that if you do those training snacks throughout the day, it's actually more benefit than you just hit the gym twice a week or something like that.
Yeah. And so again, I think we can cherry pick studies a little bit, but I think generally this idea that shorter, more frequent bouts of exercise may be even more beneficial than a single long bout of exercise. There's some evidence for that related to blood sugar control as well. But again, these studies tend to be relatively small, and we really need these more rigorous randomized controlled trials to address it. But yeah, I think the message there is the more you can do, the better, and the more frequently you can do it to break up sedentary behavior is definitely a good strategy.
I kind of wanted to know, what do you do for yourself?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what works for me. It's not necessarily to say it's the best or it's what everyone should be doing, but personally, I'm obviously a committed exerciser. It's scheduled into my calendar. I make sure I do something pretty much every day, and it's really a mix of cycling style interval exercise. So, it's summer in Canada right now, or just about to be. And so I ride my bike outside a lot. In the winter, it's stationary cycling a lot. And I also play ice hockey once a week. And I spread that with a lot of body weight style resistance exercise. So I have a small home gym with a rack and some basic equipment. So I think my resistance exercise is functional movements, squats, pull-ups, cleans, some kettlebell work, things like that. So I would say it's a very simple style of training, and I don't need a personal trainer or anyone yelling at me or group fitness classes. That works for a lot of people. My wife certainly enjoys that style of training, but it's not something that I need. So I haven't been to a gym in probably 15 years. I do a lot of it on my own at home.
That's awesome. Like my work of exercise, I like to do pole dancing. That's my kind of meditation for myself, and also hard enough because you lift your body all the time. But right now I feel like that type of exercise getting a little bit easier for me. So it's not as challenging as I like, unless I go to a class and somebody yell at me. If I do by myself, I feel like, oh, and maybe I need something more, something that's more challenging. Maybe I need to do like more crazy shit. I don't know.
And that's great to hear. It's great to hear. And it's a reminder that, we think about exercise as a special thing that we do in a special place after we change into specialized equipment, or specialized clothing, but it's just physical activity, right? And so dancing or all these activities that we don't think of as exercise certainly can count. And so again, it's easy to say, but it's this idea of finding something you like and enjoy, and you're more likely to stick with it, right? And so it all counts, right? Let's not worry about what's the best, it's what's the best for you.
Let's talk about resistance training a little bit. So obviously for our audience, sarcopenia is a very scary word. And again, for someone who has not done the resistance training for years, or maybe for tens of years, what is a good starting point, and how should they measure progress?
Yeah, and so my colleague at McMaster is Professor Stuart Phillips, who's obviously very well known in this area, and Stuart does a lot of research on resistance exercise, especially as individuals are aging. And so a lot of the basic messages we've been talking about here. Starting slow, getting out of your comfort zone. Resistance exercise doesn't mean you have to throw around heavy weights in a gym. It can just be applying any type of resistance, and using your body weight can be a very good way to start. So simple air squats, or squats down on a chair, or wall sits. If you're not able to do a full push-up, you can do a push-up against the wall, or you can drop your knees. So there's many different modifications to simple bodyweight style exercise that can be extremely beneficial. When we talk about functional fitness, one of the most functional movements is, can we get up unassisted from a seated position? Can we get out of a chair on our own? Because one of the things that will predict whether we're going to need assisted living or potentially go into an assisted living environment is, can you get up off the toilet unassisted? And so, arguably as we age, VO2 max is always important, but arguably as we age, strength becomes even more important. And, obviously your audience would well know what sarcopenia is. And so engaging in strategies to improve on our muscle strength is critical, especially as we age. But again, it doesn't have to be fancy. And the other point is, we don't necessarily have to lift really, really heavy things. We can lift lighter weights, but just do more repetitions. And again, a lot of research from Dr. Phillips has suggested that, lighter weights, but doing more, so you're increasing the relative stress through time, as opposed to just heavy weight to begin with, can be equally beneficial in terms of increasing your strength, increasing your muscle mass. So again, find something you like and enjoy. Many different ways to engage in this. If you like to lift heavy weights at the gym, great, but it's not the only way that you can engage in resistance exercise.
Yeah, and easier weights also are easier on our joints, right? And because so it means the risk of injury is smaller if you deal with lighter weights and more repetitions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Another question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, another question I wanted to ask is about supplements, right? Aside from exercise, audience wanted to know what kind of supplement that can maybe presumably help us with increasing mitochondrial health, VO2 max. Maybe I heard something about carnitine that can help for the mitochondrial health. Do you have some recommendation for supplements?
Yeah, I think generally the data around supplements are, it's fresh of mind because Dr. Phillips gave a presentation at the American College of Sports Medicine meeting. And, we talk about getting the base right. You think of a pyramid, right? And the fundamentals are enough physical activity, both aerobic and resistance, enough sleep, breaking up sedentary time, a proper diet, right? And so maybe if we're getting all of those things right, supplements are the tiny little amount at the top of the pyramid, right? But for most people, they really don't need to worry about supplements. And for most individuals, the data around any specific supplements being beneficial is not great. The exceptions are things like creatine, which is obviously very well researched. And there's a lot of excellent research suggesting that creatine supplementation can enhance muscle strength. There's even some interesting work around brain health in that with creatine. After that, caffeine can definitely be beneficial in terms of acutely improving performance. And so some of these things, the idea would be, can the supplement allow you to work at a slightly higher pace, which then over time may add up to a greater training stimulus? But, we've done some work with various supplements, and, exercise is really the big hammer, and the supplement is very, very subtle. So I can't sit here and recommend any supplement, frankly, to potentially improve your VO2 max other than regular exercise training. Again, creatine, for strength, not bad, but some of the evidence around carnitine, there is some evidence if you supplement with carnitine for a long time, we're talking 6 months or so here, you typically have to take it with carbohydrate. You can see an improvement in carnitine in the muscle, and that can be associated with some shifts in carbohydrate and fat burning, at least during low or to moderate intensity exercise. But, I wouldn't sit here and suggest that someone should take a carnitine supplement to improve their health and their function. Regrettably, the data on the magic pills is not so good, is it?
I was studying the mechanism of aging. So actually we published a paper on ibuprofen, maybe can slow down some of the aging parameters. And then all of this audience asked me, hey, do you recommend to taking ibuprofen? I said, no. That was just like basic research paper. We have no data on human. That was really great. Thank you so much. Yeah,
no, thank you for your interest in the work. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. And I hope some of what we talked about might be of interest to your audience.